Okay, it's 6 o'clock and time to begin our special workshop and in relationship to our budget. We'll start out with a roll call, Brad.
Ross,
Here.
Holman,
Yes.
Licio,
Here.
Habit,
Here.
Olson.
Here. Okay, we're going to jump right in. Welcome you that may be watching, and we'll get to you towards the end of this presentation. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our finance director, Mr. Vasenik, to give us an overview of the complete budget. Jeremy?
Thank you, Your Honor. Your Honor and Counsel, this is the public information meeting. I'm just going to share my screen here. Hold on one second. This is the public information meeting, what was formerly known as Truth in Taxation. It's part of the annual budget process and levy process for the city to determine and finalize its proposed property tax levy and budget for the upcoming 2021 year. As part of that process, we do review the proposed governmental funds budget as well as the proposed property tax levy to support that budget with the public. And then at the end of the presentation, provide the public with an opportunity to provide any comments they wish to provide in relation to the proposed budget and the related operating levy that's attached to that. We did accept, as you referred to a little bit, the mayor at the end will accept comments on the budget if anyone is tuning in to this presentation. Also, we did accept public comments in advance of the meeting. We had a couple phone calls about that, and I'll just summarize those as we conclude on the presentation. So just a quick overview, I guess, as part of the budget process. We'll provide an overview of the legislation that affects the property taxes and the 2021 proposed budget. Present a summary of the market and tax capacity, as well as reviewing the proposed property tax levy. And then we will go through the proposed 2021 governmental funds budgets, which includes our general fund, various special revenue funds, capital project funds, as well as the debt service fund. The discussion on the city's enterprise funds, which include water, sewer, and stormwater, will occur at a later date. And then finally, we'll announce the next step in the budget, a levy process, as well as provide that opportunity for public comments. So part of the legislation that impacts how our property taxes are calculated is the valuation of a home, how that's determined. Nothing has changed from the 2020 determination of that valuation. So for residential homestead, it's based on 1% of the first $500,000 of market value. And then anything over that $500,000 valuation is calculated at 1.25%. For non-homesteaded residential, a single unit, it's based also on that same 1% for that first $500,000 of market value. And duplexes, triplexes, and vacant land are at 1.25% on the valuation, as are apartments, which have 4 or more units. So for commercial and industrial rates, that also is the same as 2020. The first $500,000 of valuation is taxed at 1.5%, and then anything over that 150,000 is at 2% to determine the tax capacity. In addition to the local property tax calculation, which is made up of the city, county, and school district, as well as Region 5 and the Crow Wing County HRA, there is a state tax rate that's applied for general education. And that estimated tax rate for 2021 is 36% that goes directly to the state. And that's based on the first $100,000 of valuation being exempt from that property tax. And that was implemented a few years ago in aid of some smaller businesses to exempt them from the first $100,000 of their valuation. As we've talked about previously, the city doesn't receive any local government aid. So we are reliant primarily on the property tax levy to fund a majority of our operations. And you can kind of see just a summary there of some of the roller coaster funding that we saw historically in the past when there used to be a market value homestead credit program. That ultimately was replaced in 2011 after it was eliminated with a new market value homestead exclusion. And what that does is it lowers the valuation of those homesteaded homes for what their tax capacity is based upon. So the goal kind of there too is it kind of eliminated the need to take it back when the state was having budget deficits. They often didn't, as you see on those previous lines there, didn't actually fund that market value credit to the city. They applied it to the various households, but they didn't actually remit it to the city when there was budget problems at the state level. Under this new formula, it's directly reducing that valuation before that tax is being calculated. The way that market value homestead exclusion program works is it's equal to 40% of the first $76,000 in market value. And then that begins to phase out at about 9% of the market value over $76,000 until it finally reaches zero for a value of a home that's at $413,800 or higher. As I indicated, the state no longer pays a share of that taxes, but homesteads now have less of their value subject to taxation. A couple of the other things that are really unknown at this point, ongoing factors that will potentially shape our budget even after it's adopted, is the next state budget forecast. That's scheduled to be released tomorrow. Early indications do indicate that it's probably running a little bit better than what they originally looked at earlier this year. Sales tax has continued to remain strong at the state as well as at the city level. However, it's really unknown at this point how that impact of the pandemic could affect both short-term and long-term the city's budget. So if we look at the estimated market value of the city, this is just kind of a composition of the current estimated market value of the city. A little over half of the estimated market value is made up of homesteaded residential properties within the city. And then about 32% of that is commercial. And then to a lesser degree, you see apartments at 8% and industrial at 1%, and some other residential amounts, some filling out the remainder of that. From that estimated market value, then we determine what the tax capacity is. And you can see on this bar graph here, just kind of a history of over the last 10 years of how that's changed. Back in 2012, a little bit post-recession, when we finally felt the effects with the lag that does occur at the property tax level from the 2008 recession, our tax capacity was about $10.6 million. That did dip a little bit in 2013 and 14, kind of the lingering effects there, primarily due to some of the commercial valuations that were continuing to decline in the city, before we finally saw kind of an increase in 2015 at $10.5 million. And then it's kind of steadily grown from that point to where we're currently at with an estimated 2021 tax capacity of a little over $12.7 million. That'll be finalized early next spring as the county works through any tax appeals that occurred or any valuation changes that may have still need to be adjusted, including homestead applications that property owners could file between now and the next week or so. So the other component that makes up not only the tax base of the city is just the proposed spending, I guess, that the city has. So for 2021, we have an operating levy proposed at a little over $6.18 million, which is comprised of our general fund operations, as well as some transfers that we make to other funds for operations. In addition to that, we have special levies for debt service that has been relatively flat over the last number of years at a little over $1,076,000. For a total levy of $7,256,500 proposed for 2021. Based on that tax capacity, or tax base, I guess you could call it, for the city of $12.7 million, when you divide that into it, it results in a tax capacity rate or preliminary tax capacity rate of a little over 56.7% for the city. As a comparison to 2020, our property tax levy was $6,879,600, and our tax capacity at that point was a little over $12.3 million. That translated to a tax capacity rate of 55.788%. So looking at a comparison between the 2 years, the overall levy increase is proposed to be a little over $376,000, or about 5.5% from 2020's levy. The next graph here just kind of shows kind of the overall change in the levy over the last 10 years. You can kind of see we were hovering right around that $5.5 million in 2012, through 2014. And that was just based on kind of a post-recession of holding the levy pretty level. Actually, it decreased slightly in 2012 from the previous 2011. That year has fallen off, I guess, on the 10 years here. But during that so we've increased about 33% over that 10-year period. During that same period, inflation has increased about 15% overall during that period. So next, we'll kind of look at just how that property tax levy does impact various valuations. The first set of tables here looks at the fact that if your valuation didn't change, and it's important to keep in mind that each valuation is different. It's subject to the county sets the valuations for each property. So we have some kind of averages from what we've seen residential as well as commercial values change, but that is just an average. Each property is going to be different. It could include some improvements that were done on those individual properties, as well as just the sales that were occurring, specifically impacting the valuation of that property. But the first set of tables here just looks specifically at three various valued homes. That $76,000, that was kind of where that market value homestead exclusion is fully realized at $30,400. And then the median priced home in Baxter is about $175,000. So we take a look at that valuation as well. And then a little bit higher valued home at $250,000. And then finally, a smaller commercial industrial business at $500,000. So how that's calculated is you take the estimated market value and then you deduct the homestead market value exclusion on those residential properties to come up with a taxable market value. From that, you determine what the tax capacity is. And as I indicated earlier, it's 1% for that first $500,000 on a commercial, or excuse me, on a residential valuation. So you can see the various tax capacities there for those three different valued homes. From that, you apply the tax capacity rate of the combined jurisdictions. So that'd be made up once again of the city, county, school district, as well as the two special jurisdictions, which are Region 5 and Boyne County HRA. So in 2020, the total tax capacity rate was a little over 118.8%. In addition to that, there's a school referendum market value tax, and that's based specifically on the valuation of the property, not accounting for any kind of exclusions or a tax capacity factor. So for 2020, the city property taxes were $254 on that smaller valued home. On the median valued home, it was $856, and it was $1,312 on that $250,000 home. On a commercial small property of $500,000 valuation, that tax was $5,160. And then you can see the total taxes with all the jurisdictions there as well. So then looking at 2021, when you apply the various tax capacity rates of the various jurisdictions, the proposed overall tax capacity rate increases slightly to 119.619% for the various valuations. The state's portion is estimated at 36% for that commercial property, down from the 39% in 2020. And so from that, you can determine what the various city taxes would be on those various priced homes. So that median priced home at $175,000 would see their city taxes go increase to $871, which would result in about a $15 increase on their city portion of their taxes. Their overall tax bill would be about $2,055, or about a $9 decrease overall. On that smaller commercial industrial, the overall change decreased about $208, and on the city's portion of it, it increased to $88. And then that's just kind of summarized here a little bit in that table again. So again, assuming no change in valuations on those various residential and commercial small property, you can see what the tax impact would be on the city portion of it, anywhere from a $4 to a $22 increase on that larger valued residential, and $88 increase on the small commercial industrial, 1.7% increase overall. So the next tables here kind of take a look more at if we apply that average residential increase of 3.5% roughly and 8.9% of commercial valuation. And this is just based on preliminary information provided from Crow Wing County on the valuation changes that we saw from the ending last year to what we were seeing earlier this year in the overall valuations. Again, it's just a small indicator of that. Each property is unique and is going to be valued a little bit different. So those circumstances won't be the same for every residential property, but on average, it gives a little bit of a picture of that impact if property increased by 3.5% on the residential basis and about 9% on the commercial basis. So again, those taxes are for the city and the county or city, and for the residential and commercial are the same for 2020 here. You can see what those were, same as they were before. But then if we apply that increase across the board on that average increase, you can see how based on that new tax capacity rate of 119.6%, that $75,000 value, $76,000 valuation property increased to about $78,675. That median $175,000 home increased to $181,160 based on that percentage increase. And that smaller commercial industrial property at $500,000 increased to $544,500. So the summary shows here how that impacts the city's portion of the taxes. You can see it's about a $21 increase on that small valued priced home. On that median valued home at $175,000, that's now about $181,000, would see about a $53 increase in their city portion of their taxes. And a $250,000 home now valued roughly at about $259,000 would see about a $77 annual increase in their property taxes for the city. That small commercial property that was valued at $500,000 now at $544,000 would see about a $600 increase in their city portion of their taxes. So that's the city portion. I'll just back up here. You can kind of see the overall impact of that is about a $33 up to $114 increase on the residential valuations, and about a $1,200 increase on the commercial valuation. So the next slide just kind of shows a little bit of the breakdown of the various jurisdictions' tax capacity rates, as well as the share of a $75,000 residential home where that tax bill is comprised of. So you can see if based on that property tax payment on that $175,000 home, about $871 or 42% of that share is the city's portion. The school district makes up about 32% of that portion, followed by Crow Wing County at 25%. Obviously, they have much larger tax capacities than the city of Baxter does. And then to a lesser degree on those special jurisdictions with the county HRA, about $10 of that $175,000 homes bill would be applied to the HRA, and about $2 towards Region 5. And then just a table here showing kind of that change in the tax capacity rates from the current 2020 final rate at a collective amount of 118.8% to what's being proposed for 2021 at 119.6%. And those are subject to change as each jurisdiction will potentially adjust their final levy in December, as well as I mentioned, any changes that occur in the tax capacity with the county finalizing those figures as well. So next part of the equation in how your tax bill is calculated certainly is the spending that occurs at each jurisdiction. So for 2021 in our proposed budget, you can kind of see the makeup of the proposed revenues for the city. As I mentioned earlier, the city does derive a majority of its operating budget from the property tax levy, as we don't receive any local government aid in the form of LGA from the state of Minnesota to provide for services. It's entirely funded by our property taxpayers at the local level here. And then followed by that sales tax, and this is within the governmental funds only. Sales tax makes up about 20% of the overall revenues of the city. Special assessments that are being repaying some of the debt service that's attached to those improvements at 10%. Rounds out the top three. So on the expenditure side within our governmental funds, you can see pretty much 3/4 or so of it. It comprises of our general government, public safety, as well as debt service, followed by community development and public works and parks. And then we have some capital projects and equipment that we fund on an ongoing basis. And then sanitation doesn't even make a blip, I guess, on here. And part of that is because the recycling program with the Crow Wing County is certainly ended with grants funding no longer being available for that. We're not providing funding to the haulers as part of that program anymore. There still is some sanitation costs, but that's primarily due to the what we classify as the leaf site, as well as the oil site located in our industrial park. So overall, within the governmental funds, we have a net of transfers about a little over $14.2 million of revenues and about $12.2 million of expenditures. And the increase in fund balance is attributable, mainly this is attributable to the sales tax proceeds that are being replenished for projects that we've done in the past. We did a significant amount of funding this year with North Forest View project. So part of that is replenishing the sales tax fund for future projects there. In addition to that, just the timing between the special assessments when those come in versus the future debt service that's being paid, as well as funding for some of the future capital purchases and projects that are financed with cash on hand in the future. So then specifically, as far as how we budget, our general fund makes up a majority of our operating budget. We have proposed operating revenues of a little over $7.3 million. Similar to the overall governmental funds, the property tax does comprise of a majority of the funding source, within the general fund. And then there's some, to a lesser degree, some other revenue sources there as well. Within the general fund, we have various departments that are funded. So on the expenditure side, you can kind of see the breakdown here of the various funding of the $7.3 million. The largest is the police department at $2.2 million, followed by parks and ground maintenance at $1,053,000, and then streets and street lighting at $980,000. So just the highlights on some of the specific funding that's occurring within the proposed 2021 budget by department. Within our general government, we do provide funding for the Senior Center, as well as the Central Minnesota Initiative Foundation and the 4th of July celebration. We also have property and liability insurance that's not allocated to other departments, that's housed in the general government. And $65,000 was allocated in 2021 for maintenance at City Hall. About a third of that is related to potentially re-roofing of the shingles that are as needed at City Hall. There aren't any significant changes. That should be actually 2020 budget for the council administration and finance. We have within our legal department for contracted services, $18,000 allocated for the city attorney, as well as $67,000 for the prosecuting contract that we coordinate with the city of Brainerd. In our information systems, about $32,000 for GIS and various network software maintenance throughout the city. In our public works administration, $12,000 for general engineering services that are contracted, as well as $4,200 identified for a differential for a potential Sourcewell funded intern that would help with MS4 inspections in 2021. In our police department, we've allocated $28,000 for fuel. We have $32,000 for software maintenance, and that includes our body and squad camera systems. $18,000 for squad maintenance, $5,000 for the canine program, as well as $28,000 for the animal control contracted services. We do contract with the city of Brainerd for fire protection. That proposed contract for 2021 is $356,100, and that represents about a 0.6% increase from our current allocation in 2020. Within our streets and street lighting department, we have, whoops, I got an extra zero in there too, $2,400 for additional 480 hours of seasonal maintenance staffing that's shared with the water and sewer departments. $40,000 for contract plowing, as well as $90,000 for salt and sand, $91,000 identified for crack sealing, and $48,000 for striping contracts, and $100,000 for miscellaneous street improvements, which includes maintenance and repairs to shoulders, gravel, and bituminous patching throughout the city. One of the projects identified in 2021 is $11,500 for a security gate at the Public Works facility. Part of that would be funded then with the enterprise funds as well, the water, sewer, and stormwater funds. And $92,000 of street lighting, utility, and maintenance, as well as $15,000 for various repairs that come up throughout the year. In our Parks and Grounds Maintenance Department of our general fund, we have $9,300 of additional funding allocated for 650 hours of seasonal maintenance staffing, $10,000 for a dumpster project at Oscar Christopherson Park, as well as $76,000 for additional maintenance professional services, $30,500 for building and structure repairs. That includes a Jewelwood Park sign replacement for $6,800, almost $20,000 for 2 new mower additions proposed to be added, $4,400 for new tandem trailer addition, as well as $50,000 that's being set aside for future vehicle and equipment replacements as those are programmed in the future. And then we do contract with ISD 181 Community Education to administer our recreation program. That amount has been identified at $32,700 for 2021. In addition to those departments within our general fund, we do have various transfers that occur to some of our capital project and special revenue funds, and we'll talk about those specifically after the general fund here. So the next set of funds that we do budget for are special revenue funds, and those are funds that are have revenues that are generated from dedicated sources, as well as some of the fund transfers that I alluded to earlier. So we have 7 special revenue funds that we budget for, including our cemetery, capital parks, community development, economic development, or EDA, as well as lodging tax administration, our various tax increment funds, and our sales tax collection fund. So you can kind of see a summary there of the various revenues and expenditures for those proposed budgets for 2021. So within our cemetery fund, this accounts for a little over $60,000 of planned activities in the cemetery, including a columbarium project that was held over from this year. Our community development fund is comprised of our planning and building department operations. In our capital parks fund, we have a carryover of some of the initial planning for the Mississippi Overlook Park, funded at $25,000. And in our EDA fund, we have up to $35,000 that's proposed to be allocated for the BLADEC contributions to provide economic development services on behalf of the city. Our lodging tax administration fund, this is a lodging tax that's set at 3% per state statute. That's a tax that's applied to each stay at a hotel within the city of Baxter. By law, that has to be spent on marketing of those hotels and the area. So 95% of that tax receipts that are collected are remitted to the Brainerd Lodging Association, which does it for marketing efforts on their behalf of the hotels in the city of Baxter, as well as the city of Brainerd. And we're estimating that amount would be about $228,000 for next year. That's down from this year's budget of $383,000. One of the direct impacts we are seeing from the pandemic certainly is the lower lodging tax receipts that are being derived in the city at this point. We also, within our tax increment funds, we have various economic development, redevelopment, housing, and renovation and renewal district activities, and we've estimated activities for 2021 at a little over $604,000, and that's comprised of some of the infrastructure that we've issued debt for related to specifically the Isle Drive project in 2015, as well as in 2018, the Excelsior Edgewood project with TIF District 14, as well as some of the pay-as-you-go notes that we have with some of our housing districts for providing affordable housing within the city. And then our sales tax collection fund is our next special revenue fund. You can see here we have various transfers to fund some of the debt service related to the water treatment plant that was funded with the original bond issue in 2007 that was refinanced or refunded in 2013. In addition to that, we're funding our share of the wastewater treatment plant with Brainerd Public Utilities in the form of a note issued in 2009. For that share, a little over $500,000 is being allocated in 2021 towards those debt service payments. In addition to that, some of the initial costs projected for the Whiskey Creek Stormwater Improvement Project at the golf course, as well as the revenue sharing agreement that we have with Brainerd as part of the last authorization for sales tax in 2014. 20% of our sales tax proceeds up to the $8 million total is allocated towards the airport project. So that estimate for 2021 is a little over $562,000. So the next set of funds that we budget for include our capital project funds. You can see the four capital project funds that we budget for there, including our capital equipment fund, as well as our collector street fund, our street replacement fund, and our trail construction and maintenance fund for the city. And these are sinking funds that we do set money aside to pay for future project costs that don't necessarily occur in this year, but give us the funds to be able to pay for some of those things without having to issue debt in the future for those items. And it really kind of balances out the need to have significant increases in the levy to pay for equipment or projects in 1 year when we're able to save for that and then avoid paying interest on that as well with future debt issuances. So within our capital equipment fund, we have 2 squads scheduled for replacement, as well as a carryover of a replacement of the 1-ton truck in the streets department and the dump truck with a plow as well. And then the other 2 carryover items from this year include the park's addition of a new vehicle truck with a plow, as well as a replacement of a 3-wheel drive infield pro piece of equipment in the parks department. And as I mentioned earlier, it is basically to provide a sinking fund so that we can minimize the need for large increases in the future. So within our municipal state aid collector street fund, again, it's a sinking fund, and we've utilized this in the past to pay for most recently the Cypress Drive project in 2018, as well as part of the Forest View Drive collector streets that are associated in that project on Forest View. It's helped fund a portion of that as well. And then for 2021, we're proposing a railroad study to look at the silent crossing needs of the city for $20,000. And then we also have a street replacement fund, and the purpose of that is to provide an ongoing funding source for some of that maintenance as well. And then finally, a trail construction and maintenance fund, and that's similar to the street. It's to provide for trail construction and maintenance. So we have some projects identified for 2021, including some bridge inspections at the bridges near Walmart, $10,000 for a pavement management plan related to trails, and then $50,000 of various maintenance and repairs, including poly patching, crack sealing, and asphalt patch repairs to the citywide trail system. And then our final governmental fund budget is our debt service funds. You can see here we have proposed revenues of about $3.6 million and expenditures planned for 2021 of about $3.4 million. And that's comprised of a portion of our property tax levy that I alluded to earlier, the $1,076,000 that we allocate annually, as well as anticipated receipts of sales taxes for 2021 of about $1.5 million, and then some funding from other funds, and that includes our sales tax fund that I referenced earlier to pay for some of those project costs, in addition to some debt service payments that are made from our enterprise funds as well. So almost $1 million there as well, that comprise of the revenue side of the equation. And then on the expenditure side for debt service, we have bond principal and interest payments of about almost $3.5 million. So as far as the next steps in our budget and property tax levy information meeting, adoption of the final levy and governmental funds budget is scheduled for our regular council meeting on December 15th, 2020. As part of the improvement process, the public information process here, what I alluded to, public comments certainly are encouraged and accepted as part of this process. So as part of the Zoom experience here, I guess we can certainly take public comments via Zoom here. I think people have the ability to raise their hand when the mayor calls on them. In addition to that, we asked via our website and the individual truth and taxation notices that were mailed by the county to contact the city if they had any questions, or else the meeting would be held virtually. We did receive, I did receive 2 phone calls related to that process, and those were both in regard to valuation, how their valuations were set, and I kind of walked them through how that process works and how the valuations certainly are set by Crow Wing County Land Services. The city of Baxter isn't directly involved in that part of the equation. Obviously, their tax bill is made up of 2 components, one being the spending that we're proposing. That's what we're here to discuss tonight. In addition to that, the valuation that makes up their specific property tax calculation. In addition to that, we did receive a written email from Ray Griffin and I'll just enter that into the record, at 11766 River Vista Drive. And he had some questions about the valuation of his adjacent vacant lot and the impact that would have on a future project. So again, that is determined by Crow Wing County as far as the valuations. That's not something the city directly sets or has direct impact on or doesn't coordinate with Crow Wing County as far as how those valuations are determined on individual properties. In addition to that, we did receive, I think it was right at 4:30, a summary of some questions, I guess, provided from Justin Barrick at 4897 Oak Street too, that we could certainly enter into the record. I guess with that, maybe we'll turn it back over to the mayor, I guess, for any comments or questions from the council or the public.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy, for that presentation. Let's just start with the council. Any comments, clarification, any of you need on what was just presented? Okay, then we will go to, if anybody's in the audience listening, our IT director, Mr. DeBoer, will help us with that. The recommendation is if you're out there and you are punched in, you have the ability to electronically raise your hand, I guess, and then he will click you into our meeting and we'll be off to the races. So Todd, we got anybody?
Yes, there are 3 attendees. Looks like Justin Barrick has raised his hand. I will allow him to talk, so he can unmute and then he should be able to ask his question.
Okay, thanks, Todd.
Yeah, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for hosting this meeting. I do have a few questions, so I'll just maybe start with one and see if some other folks, have questions. One is, on the streets department budget, it looks like we're proposing a 70% increase from the 2020 budgeted amount of $53,000. What is driving this cost increase? I'm assuming that street salt and sand are a fairly, constant expense. Is the price of salt really gone up that much? And is Baxter's plowing and salting strategy changing more to just salting and less plowing, or can anyone speak to that?
Jeremy or Brad?
I don't have the numbers offhand, but the cost of salt has increased. We are not proposing any change in regards to the method in which we are snow plowing or applying the salt. Justin, being that we received your email here just towards the end of the business day, haven't had the opportunity to fully get into those, but after the meeting adjourns, my staff and I will look into those and set up a time to go over those with you prior to the council taking any final action on the 15th.
Okay, thank you.
Is that it, Justin? Looks like it. I appreciate it. Was a long email. There were a lot of questions in there, and they all deserve an answer. But it will take a little research and time to get back to it, and the staff certainly will do that. So thanks for your comments. Todd, anybody else?
No, it doesn't appear anyone else has raised their hands.
Okay. We're in new uncharted territory with this meeting and with all of our meetings as far as that goes, and so we're all trying to work through it, and we certainly don't want to leave anybody out if there's somebody that wants to.
There is one more, Mayor.
Okay.
John Ward, he just has to unmute and he should be able to ask his question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and counselors and staff. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So I had a couple city residents contact me about what we call the Truth in Taxation meeting. And I encourage them to send in their questions. And Ray was one of them, and it sounds like he did. And then there was another one. I don't know if they called or if they sent it in or not. Ron Allard was the other one that had talked to me. So I just wanted to know, I know that so much of our property tax base comes from the county assessor, and Ray's questions and also Ron's questions pretty much revolve around that county assessor. So my question to you is this, have we been, in history of the assessments done by the county, have they always seemed to be right on in their assessments as far as market valuation and things like that? And how do they do all the city in 1 year, or do they do it like every quarter of 1 year, quarter of another year, quarter of, split it up?
Yeah, I can take that. It used to be every 4 years. I think it's every 5 years now. They're supposed to physically make an appointment with you and come to your house and just do a reevaluation. A lot of people don't respond, so then they guess based on a drive-by and so on and so forth. But they also do sales studies, and they localize those sales studies. Baxter has looked at Baxter, and Brainer's looked at Brainerd. They're not compared to each other. The sales are formulated or looked at, again, by city. Townships are the same way, so on and so forth. So Baxter is judged against itself, and they look at the ratios. What did it sell for versus what did the county assessor have it assessed for? And by state law, they are supposed to be at 95% of that number. They're allowed to slip down 5%. If they slip down, and this is based on a few years ago when I worked there, but if they slip down as few as I think it was 7 sales, then the state would come in and order a increase on everybody. So it behooved the appraisers to make sure that it's fair and make sure that people that are going up are going up because it's based on reality and not just the generic increases. And I would say, that's a question for the assessor. We can certainly find out, but the increases that we've had has been based on the fact that our sales have been higher than what the assessed market value has been. And so then he has adjusted it based on those sales. Now, what's happened in the kind of the immediate past is that the residential kept going up, and there was a kind of a hiccup on the commercial side. And so those properties were actually getting some decreases by the assessor's office. And then, of course, that has to be made up someplace. And so a lot of that fell then to the residential people too. But basically, I think they're doing mass appraising. They're not individual appraisers. A fee appraiser working for a bank or whatever maybe does $300 a year. Mass appraisers, those people in that office are responsible for 3,000 to 5,000 parcels. So do they make mistakes? Sure they do. But that's the reason why everybody is sent a notice in the spring and are told, this is what we think your property is worth. If it's not and you don't agree, then you need to contact us. So it's kind of a quote unquote buyer beware scenario. And if you don't agree with it in the spring, then, which I did, I called, mine went up, I thought tremendously. And so I called in the spring and I said, I need an explanation, and can you show me some sales like my house that sold for that kind of money, which they did. They did produce those sales. And so at that point, I was kind of, barking up a tree because they did have the sales. But that's the time to do that, is when you get the notice in the spring to question the value. You need to deal with it right away. And they are, they're good to work with, and it's their job to show you how they came to that number, and you can go from there. Ultimately, if you're at total disagreement and are never going to agree, you can always go to tax court and the judge will make the decision. So there are, and that's all explained on the forms, that are mailed out too. So I don't know, it's probably more than you wanted to hear, John, but that's the process.
Well, thank you, Mayor. It's a very good explanation. Just one more quick follow-up to that. And Jeremy, I think that Ray's email indicated that he had a vacant lot over in this Forestview area that was significantly dropped in value and could reflect a future potential sale of that lot for him. And he was wondering about, the reasoning for that. I think it dropped was around 40% of the valuation. Do you have any indicators about why that happened? Jeremy?
Yep. Hold on a second. No, I'm not involved in the valuations, I guess. So that would, once again, that probably is a question for the county, I guess, since they set the valuations on properties. I did look, I guess, and I was going to see if I could pull it up here, the history of his valuation, and I don't know if I still have it up here or not. It looks like in 2016, it was valued a little over $62,000, and the county had dropped it in 2017, 2018 to about $50,000, and then most recently to $31,000. I guess I don't know why that would be, though. I guess that'd be a question for the assessor's office at the county.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and just to follow up too, I did talk to Mr. Aller today too, a little bit about his valuations too. I think he's trying to do some determinations of how his neighbors are being valued, and that's again, this is probably a question for the county to help him with versus the city. We don't have that information at the local level here.
Thank you very much.
It's just really important that people pay attention to when they get those notices in the spring, that's the time to challenge that, and that's the time to talk about it. Because once the time passes, then that kind of becomes it's right or wrong. It's kind of assumed that everybody agrees with it, that that's the right number, and then we move on down the line and we get to the taxation part, and then people think, well, no, that I don't think that is right. But then the door is kind of closed at that time. So anyway, it's just really behooves people to make those calls right away when they get that notice if they don't agree with that number. That's just a blanket statement. Anybody else, Jeremy or Todd out there?
Yes, one second. Looks like Mr. Barrick has another question.
Okay.
I can't resist with the small audience. I'm not going to go through every item, and I appreciate your commitment to follow up with me, but as long as the entire council's here, I just want to voice one of my concerns is with these seasonal park attendants. I realize it's a drop in the bucket budget-wise, but there's not much more in the city that I see as a visible consumption of tax dollars with little benefit than some of these seasonal park attendants sitting in a chair playing on their phone the entire time, especially at Whipple Beach this last summer. So if we could try to button up the expectations for those folks, so it looks like they're representing the city in a more worthwhile manner, I would appreciate it, because at this point, what I saw last summer is I just really questioned the value of having a park attendant at Whipple Beach. Especially during the weekdays. Maybe there's some value on the weekends, I'm not sure, but minimally they should be wearing some sort of attire that is indicative of being a city employee, having some sort of signage near them that indicates they're a park attendant and they're there for questions and concerns to be fielded to them. You know, one day this summer, the park attendant was sitting inside the building with the door open. No one would have known anyone was even working there. So I just wanted to share that. We're not all getting to all the parks at all times, but you know, if that was a public works staff sitting there for several hours a day playing on his phone, I'm guessing, you know, the city would follow up with them. So.
Okay, appreciate those. Those are good comments, and we will take those seriously and research that. Good points. Anybody else, Todd?
No,
Okay.
appears that should be it.
Well, I appreciate those comments. People taking the time to check in with us. We appreciate that. We've got some good notes here to look at. Council, anybody got anything you want to say or add to the discussion? Brad, anything?
No, just wanted to point out that the emails that we did receive today from Mr. Ward and Mr. Griffin have been forwarded to your emails account. So you do have those yourself to review and to take under consideration when we meet again on the 15th. As I indicated, I'll follow up with each of them and try and provide them the responses to the questions that they have asked in their emails. So just know that that'll be done before we meet on the 15th.
Sounds good. Okay, if there's nothing else, I would look for a motion to adjourn.
Connie will make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Cross. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Cross,
Aye.
Holman,
Yes.
Licio,
Yes.
Tabit,
Yes.
and Olson.
Yes. See you all tomorrow night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for
Bye.
being here.